Wynford, welcome to the Lifestylist Podcast.
Thank you, Luke. Great to be here.
Me too, man. It's sort of fortuitous how we ended up coming to meet through the intraweb, found your work, you found my work, and luckily we're able to connect here through the conference that I've been participating in, and I'm really excited to start talking to you because like I think you've discovered, I think that most problems we face are really centered in the brain.
Absolutely. We look at everything peripheral except by what really is controlling just about everything we are, everything we do.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about, which is amazing. And, I just took a stack of nootropics and smart drugs up in my room, and while we're preparing for this, I'm like, I bet if we could just fix our brains, half of us wouldn't need to take all that shit. So I'm excited to talk about your biohacking breakthrough, Zing Performance. Most of us try to solve our problems with supplements and therapy and biohacks and self-help and all of this with our neurological stress, mood swings, obsessions, addictions, all that kind of stuff. So what's the most surprising problem that brain development addresses?
Well, at the extreme end, if you look at, say, autism, you've got there the combination of so many deficits. So that to be able to help someone with autistic symptoms really gives huge hope for most of us, because most of us have got skill limitations in one or two or three areas. But when you can tackle someone that's got a very broad range. So that's number one. Equal with that is the fact that we've been doing some research with the elderly, those that are in decline, those whose skills that they did have are now fading, be it balance, be it confidence, be it memory, be it reading skills. So the ability to look at those two kind of extreme groups where previously I thought I couldn't do anything. Now we're discovering we can. So those are the two surprising areas for me.
And how did you get into this? Tell us about your daughter and that whole experience that, first drove your passion to start doing this research.
My daughter, the oldest of four, went to good schools, had great teachers, but didn't learn. She worked hard, but didn't learn. So it wasn't long before her younger siblings were going ahead of her, and you can imagine her self-esteem was just going down and down and down and down. The teachers were distraught. The parents were distraught, and so on. And she went through school life not learning anything, and then in her late teens she started to become very depressed. That depression led to an attempt on her life, and all the experts that we'd met had said things like, she's got to learn to live with it. In other words, we can't do anything. They'd given her the medication, they'd given her interventions, extra teaching. Nothing was working. Well, at that time, I was running some pretty big businesses, which I started, so I sold them and threw all of my money, all my time and resource at finding out why Susie couldn't learn. And it's just been the most amazing journey ever since.
How long ago was that?
That was 20 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. So I've spent 20 years researching this, and so I think I'm probably ahead of anybody in the world. I certainly don't know of anyone that's got more advanced studies and programs to transform the cerebellum. So we're in an exciting place, and our determination is that we want to reach 1 million people and do research on 1 million.
So you've helped 50,000 people so far in the past 20 years. How did you first start developing the awareness that it was rooted in the cerebellum? Because out of all the neurofeedback and everything that I've done, brain-related, I've never heard one time anyone mention the cerebellum. I didn't even know it's like a useful part of the brain. I remember it from, I don't know what type of science class in school, but, I'm aware that it's a part of the brain. I don't know what it does. We hear about the amygdala. We hear about the prefrontal cortex. We hear about the pineal gland, et cetera, et cetera. Even the corpus callosum, what's it called? Callosum?
Corpus callosum, yes.
I always think of colostrum, this great supplement that I take. But, we hear about all those, but the cerebellum is like, what? What does that have to do with anything? Well, so what led you to first look at that in terms of the brain?
Well, if you're an entrepreneur, you're looking for solutions. I'd got a daughter that didn't want to live. I had to find a solution fast. So my focus was extreme, as you can imagine. So I was talking to any professor, any academic, any medic that would talk to me on the subject. And I found a book in Hong Kong airport, and I read it on the plane on the way home, and that pointed me in a direction. And very quickly I was in touch with two professors, one in the UK who's been my mentor for the last 20 years, Professor Rod Nicholson, and he pointed me towards a professor at Harvard Medical School who has been and still is obsessed with the cerebellum. And I started getting facts like the cerebellum's only 10% of the brain, but it's more than 50% of the brain cells in the brain. It's really, really important. And yet when people do MRI scans and so on, they often miss off the cerebellum. So it really is the poor relation of, Daniel Amen called it the Rodney Dangerfield. And so when you start to look at what the cerebellum is capable of, I am shocked that every university doesn't yet have a professor that's focusing on this, because the human potential that's locked in there, that's never discovered, is going to change the world. And it's certainly going to change people that have got learning issues and performance issues and stress issues and so on.
Well, I think when it comes to psychiatric health,
yeah, exactly,
we really, most of the time, really look at neurotransmitters, hormones, developmental trauma, these kind of things. But again, not heard anyone address the cerebellum as the root of the problem. So what role does the cerebellum actually have in our brain? Like, let's just start at the very basic fundamental understanding.
The cerebellum is the master coordinator of the brain. It's the prime link between brain and body. So all of the functions that happen in the brain that have any impact on any of our body organs, not just our motor skills, our movement and balance, but our visual input, our auditory input and output, and our speech and so on. It's the bit that creates automaticity. It's the bit that creates skills. So if the cerebellum is doing its job properly, then we are going to be skilled at all of the things we need to do. They're going to be automatic, they're going to be effortless, and we're going to be confident. Wherever there is a lack in confidence, in performance, in input or output, like reading skills or listening skills, the cerebellum is involved. Now, what's not been understood is how you can change the cerebellum. To quote Daniel Amen again, he's said he's been looking at my work for 15 years, and he told me recently, he said, I don't know of any other intervention that changes the blood flow in the cerebellum other than what you're doing. And he was including in that prescribed drugs as well.
Wow.
So when you've got something so important and we've found a way of changing it, I just want to share this with the world. I've not patented my ideas because it's too important to try and restrict it. This could transform the lives of so many, and particularly, as you say, those with psychiatric conditions. At the moment, they're limited, their performance is curtailed, and the cerebellum is responsible.
And how does the cerebellum get impaired in the first place? Is that due to psychological trauma, falling on your head, jumping off a cliff, on your bike or whatever? I know when I was a kid, I banged my head on everything, so yeah, I don't know if I ever had an official...
And look at you now.
Yeah, right. 12 podcasts in 2 days. Haven't missed a beat, although I did miss one yesterday, technologically speaking. So, what's going wrong? Is it that we're being fed formula or the vaccines, or is it exogenous inputs?
That research is still to be done. My approach is I don't look for what has gone wrong. I'm just seeing countless people with issues that we can transform. So if you take autism that we touched on already, I don't get into the arguments about why they are where they are. I'm saying what I see is not the disease. I'm seeing a whole range of skill deficits that we can address. So those with autism or Asperger's, or generally on the spectrum, you'll find a whole range of skills. For some, it's the lack of ability to make friends, to read body language and so on, lack of ability to make eye contact. For some, it's lack of ability to read or to concentrate or to be coordinated physically. They're all skills. So whilst the world has been focusing totally on it being a disease and assuming it's some deep and complicated thing that can't be addressed, what I see is a range of skills that can be transformed. So to me, it's that exciting.
Interesting. So I think that's a good point of view, that it doesn't really... I think why I go to like, well, what's the root cause is that if we can have an intervention early on and maybe avoid some of the trauma or avoid some of the negative inputs, but it sounds like it could be any number of things, and it's broad reaching. So the fact is, here we are, we have this condition that's widespread. Let's just look at what the solution is and stay solution oriented rather than trying to go backward in time and fix something that, prevent something that might be unpreventable in many cases, right? You can't control the brain's environment even before birth, you know what I mean? So who knows what kind of negative energies or anything that the embryo, the fetus has been exposed to and as a kid. So let's just move into the solution.
Well, what I would say on that point, Luke, is that there's an awful lot of correlation between trauma in pregnancy, trauma at time of birth, and those that show up with deficits later on. There's significant correlation between those who bypass the crawling phase and showing up as learning deficits later on. So there's a lot happening there, but I'm always cautious about saying that because very often mum will then start to have guilt that she may have contributed to it. I really don't think that is the case from all the evidence I've seen. It needs a lot of work. And a good friend of mine, Dr. Roy Rutherford, is actually writing a book right now about how to avoid these issues, things you can do in pregnancy, things to avoid, to make sure you maximize the chance of having a child. So there's work going on. It's not enough, but it's starting.
Right. And so you'll just leave it up to some other people to make that their mission. You're about fixing what's broken.
Yeah, there are millions out there. I see them. I can't walk down the street without seeing people that I know I could transform. I own a school in England, and I keep on seeing children that I know could perform at a much higher level if these interventions that we've now got developed for the cerebellum could be introduced.
What was the first breakthrough you had in terms of helping your daughter, assuming that you did? Is she alive and well? And
she is alive and well.
A functional adult at this point?
She is alive and well. I wish I could have got to her much younger before she went through school. But yes, she's alive and well. She's an amazing human being. She's overcome so much. The first breakthrough I got, Susie, as a child, she got locked in her own world. She was kind of shy, and she wasn't particularly hyperactive, but her ability to communicate was so impaired she didn't join in any conversation. And the first thing I noticed was she was joining in a conversation. It was a round table, just like we're at now, with about 8 doctors, and she was joining in conversations about 3 months after we started the intervention. And I was I stopped the conversation I couldn't believe this was happening. So that was the first thing I noticed. Then we noticed she was starting to read, and now she buys loads of magazines, and she writes, and she runs her own small business. So there was a whole sequence of events. And what happens in this is families with a problem with a child, you tend to focus on the main thing. But underneath, there's normally a whole load of other skill deficits that are equally impacting their life, but you tend to focus on the one thing. So in America, you get the diagnosis of ADHD. In Britain, it tends to be more dyslexic because of reading issues and so on. So there's lots of differences country-wise. But for Susie, it was her reading was my big concern, but that's not what I noticed first.
And how did you first start to implement tools that helped revive and repair her cerebellum once you had done some research and discovered that might in fact be the root of her troubles? Like, what did your modality look like when it first started working? What exactly was she doing?
Well, we went mad. We didn't have time for peer-reviewed research. I'd got to save her life. I was scared of the next phone call that I was going to get constantly. So we did some mad stuff. We heard that NASA had been developing some equipment to find out why astronauts were behaving in a strange way when they leave the Earth's gravitational pull. So I bought that equipment, and what I discovered was that using that equipment, we could identify the neurological conditions that would give rise to poor reading and poor concentration. And I don't know how deep you want to go into the science, but it led us to some really exciting stuff about the vestibular system, the balance organ. When the balance organ is working well, the cerebellum, the brain-body coordination, works well. And if you keep it working well, it ends up to permanent, better development. So we were using this balance equipment that NASA had developed, and I've seen in various places that when astronauts leave the Earth's gravitational pull, they write backwards and upside down, and all sorts of things go on. And it's exactly what dyslexic people do all of the time. So I started to use equipment like that. Then we bought ocular motor testing to find out what eye tracking what eye tracking skills were like. And we discovered that...
Oh, before I forget, sorry to interrupt. Are we going to do the eye tracking thing with me today? In between?
I haven't brought it with me.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine. But we can do it remotely, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
I can get it to you. Yes.
I remember you mentioning that before, and I was like, ooh, I want to see what's up with my cerebellum. Anyway, carry on.
Well, then we discovered, we got this eye tracking equipment. We discovered that well over 90% of adults and children that struggle with reading have poor eye tracking skills. So all of these theories about them having all sorts of problems with phonics and not being intelligent and maybe being lazy, certainly being totally misunderstood, they were all out of the window all of a sudden, because we identified a skill that nailed it for virtually every child we've ever come across that struggled with reading. So that was the first thing. We started doing neurological tests, lots of them, so that we could pinpoint what's happening in the brain. See, all these cynical people that say that ADHD is just a fad and bad parenting and all that, that's, I'm afraid, totally wrong. We were able to say, no, there's neurological measures that we can take that positively identify when someone is going to have a condition like ADHD.
Interesting. When you talk about the vestibular system and the sense of balance, the thing that popped into my mind was, and I'm sorry, listeners, because I talk about this in every episode, but it was a really horrible time in my life. I had, over the last 3 years, I was unknowingly living under 2 giant cell towers.
Wow.
And I'm super EMF sensitive and just intellectually EMF aware. It's something I study a lot. I talk to the world's foremost experts on the topic. Yeah. And one of the main symptoms I experienced was vertigo and dizziness and a feeling of being on a boat, kind of thing, and walking around. And I had no idea they were there, so I didn't know what it was. So I tried every supplement and neurofeedback and EMDR and sacrocranial, everything, the whole gamut. And spent a lot of time just trying to figure out what it was. And I wonder if high EMF exposure / poisoning has a really profound effect on the cerebellum. Has anyone done any work that you're aware of to that end?
I don't know of any, but boy, you've just piqued my interest in that.
Right? Isn't that interesting?
So what happened when you moved out?
Well, first, it was interesting. I was living in this apartment for 3 years, and I knew that the ambient radiation around me was high, so I never had it tested. Yeah. And I knew that, I was renting in a flat, so I wasn't going to go spend $5,000 to EMF shield my whole bedroom and make a Faraday cage, although that's what I would recommend now. I wish I had done. But anyway, I randomly, or not randomly, maybe by divine intervention or protection, wandered up into this building to watch the sunset, and I found these cell towers. But 6 months before that, I got a device in my house called a Blue Shield. I actually have the pocket version on me right now, and it's a scalar wave technology, which I did a show on recently. So you guys,
amazing stuff.
You can look that up for anyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I installed this Blue Shield in my house and then started carrying it around, not knowing I was near cell towers, but just because I knew the ambient levels were high anyway and it couldn't hurt. And I started getting really pretty severe Herxheimer reaction when I put this in my house. And I contacted the inventor in New Zealand, and they went, "Oh, it's totally normal. What's happening is you're finally detoxing properly when you sleep because you're going full parasympathetic." So after that initial kind of Herxheimer reaction period, then a lot of those symptoms went away. Wow. And I just thought, I didn't correlate them till after I found the towers and moved out. And I looked back and I was like, holy shit. 6 months ago, the majority of my symptoms subsided dramatically. And so it was not possible for it to be placebo. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because there was a marked time between when I installed this technology in my house, which a lot of the scientifically skeptical people poo-poo, because if you come in there with an EMF meter, there's no change, right? And it's, it's a very subtle energy technology, and it literally is on a quantum level. It sounds like you're familiar with scalar wave technology, but a lot of people don't believe in it. I just know it's true because there's my N-to-1, experiment work. Yeah. So anyway, my symptoms decreased a lot from installing that technology unknowingly. But once I moved, now I'm in an area called Laurel Canyon, which is kind of up in the hills, and it's in between. I'm in a little valley.
Beautiful.
It's much better. There's no cell towers very nearby. And now I don't get that vertigo. I don't wake up with headaches. I don't have the dizziness. My brain fog is 80% improved.
Wow.
But it's horrific what we've done with this technology.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be looking back, hopefully in not so many years, going like, oh my God, do you remember when we put cell towers all over the planet, So anyway.
And 5G is going to not make it any better, for sure.
Oh man, I know. It's a balance, I was talking to Dave Asprey about this yesterday. It's like finding the balance of awareness and fear.
Yeah.
Where you do what you can to mitigate, but the cortisol and the adrenaline and the amygdala excitement of fear is probably worse for you in some cases than having a Wi-Fi router across from you in the room, So it's like, I always kind of struggle with that. Don't want to be a paranoid boy in the bubble and suffer from that neuroses, but also I want to really avoid, of course, living and being very near extreme levels of radiation like that.
Well, touching on your introduction to that point, I don't know to what extent EMF interferes with vestibular stimulation, but what I do know is that vestibular stimulation is the power that drives the cerebellum. So, for instance, children that have tubes, if they have a lot of ear infections as a child, sometimes they can have tubes inserted, which helps. Very often those children will manifest as having learning issues later on. And some ask, is it the tubes? My view is no, it's almost certainly the infections. Because when you have inner ear infections, that means the infection means it reduces the sensory stimulation. The cerebellum isn't working at those very periods when you're doing the rapid development in your early childhood. If that happens, then you bypass some of the development, and it's going to show up with lack of basic skills, maybe eye tracking skills or auditory processing skills. So there's quite a big correlation between children that have vestibular ear infection issues. Alongside that, you mentioned vertigo and so on. Travel sickness is far more prevalent in children with reading and concentration issues. It's reduction of the efficacy of the cerebellum. And the final one, which is really exciting, is if you've got a child that's severely autistic, they will love, or most, not all, most will love going to a fairground. Why do they love going to fairground rides? Why do they get so much fun and excitement about that? Because your vestibular stimulation is hugely excited. You're going up and down and around, and that huge amount of vestibular stimulation increases the effectiveness of the cerebellum. The connections in your cerebellum are far more active and alive, and you feel better. So can you see how all this comes together?
Wow, that's very interesting. I hate going on amusement park rides.
Right.
I get very disoriented, and I'm also very prone to travel sickness, as you called it. I like that as a comprehensive term versus just jet lag, because it's more than jet lag.
Sure.
So that's very interesting, that correlation. So if someone's able to repair and restore their cerebellum, is it feasible that they would become less susceptible to travel sickness and the aversion to amusement park rides and such?
Travel sickness is usually a clue you've got a lot more potential. Because travel sickness is saying there's some underdeveloped areas in the links between vestibular and the cerebellum. That to me is potential. People have probably always told you, Luke, you've got massive potential.
Oh, story of my life. Every report card. I think I have my report card somewhere, and it's like, if he would just stop being a class clown and pay attention, he could do really well. He's smart, but,
Well, now we're talking about exactly where that potential is and exactly what you've got to do to bring it into play.
Wow, interesting.
Isn't that exciting?
Yeah, hello. Is there any connection to tinnitus, the ringing in the ears?
I don't know. I suspect so, but it's not an area of, I've had to, it's a bit like being a mosquito on a nudist beach.
Right.
There's just so much we could do. I've had to, I'm easily distracted as it is. So people are always slapping my wrist. No, you can't research that. No, you've got to focus and get really good. And, in my heart, because of what happened to my daughter, my focus is children that struggle, adults that are still struggling. We get huge results with athletes and so on, and I love athletes, but not as much as I love helping kids. So I've had to narrow down my efforts. I've got a cousin that's severely impaired by tinnitus, And she's a bit annoyed with me because I've not done the research. I suspect you're right. I haven't got there yet.
Well, yeah, you've got to choose your battles, I suppose, and really focus on what matters most. You talked about Dr. Daniel Amen, who, by the way, I would love to get on my podcast. So I'm going to talk to you about that later. I've been kind of waiting for a first-person intro, someone that knows him and works with him. I think his work's just absolutely brilliant. And when it comes to brain scans in particular, and really taking a look at brains, it's quite astonishing, the stuff that he's able to see and discover. How did you get introduced to him, and what's he done other than support the idea of your work? How has your relationship developed since you first found one another?
Sure. Well, he's a scientist. He wants to see evidence for everything. So he's pointed quite a few people to my program, to my intervention. And he's working now on analysing the results, and I think he wants to write it up. I don't know exactly where he's at. I did 3 podcasts with him one day after he cross-examined me for a couple of hours, and that was very exciting. I'm hugely impressed by his approach to every individual. He studies the brain of everyone, so he doesn't just prescribe pills based on the symptoms. He looks at the root cause of the symptoms, and I think that's one area where most psychiatrists have been missing out. They have not had the tools, the skills, the measures to be able to look at where the root cause is. So it's any treatment that's symptom-based is going to be more hit and miss than it needs to be.
Do his brain scans with problematic people with the kind of issues we're talking about show a gray out in the cerebellum? Is he able to see that something's going on there? And has he looked at any before and after scans of someone, going through the training that you've developed and really working on that? Does it show up on a physiological level?
It does. It absolutely does. He said that a very large proportion of those that present to him with issues in the brain have low blood flow in the cerebellum. And that's, of course, what we're good at doing. The very physical exercises that we prescribe to people are focused on creating blood flow in the cerebellum. So if you create stimulation and blood flow, you're creating the environment where new cells are created. So there's research showing that the type of exercises we give increases the density of grey matter, creates even more brain cells in that very part of the brain that's going to mastermind. It's like the electrician or the computer programmer that masterminds the connections with everything else in the brain. We were hearing this weekend about the brain has virtually unlimited capacity because the number of potential connections between every brain cell is huge. So we do have this huge potential, but the secret to doing it is stimulating the cerebellum in such a way that plasticity multiplies and you create more exciting circuits.
Oh, that's interesting. I've spent a lot of time talking over the last couple of days about a couple of different topics, having done a podcast actually about one of them, and that's hyperbaric oxygen therapy, something I'm a big fan of, and then talking to Dr. Amy Killen and Dr. Harry Adelson just about the developments in stem cells, and looking at the correlation between stacking both of those therapies, right? Because in the hyperbaric, you're oxygenating your plasma, right? And then your red blood cells don't have to go so far to look around to carry oxygen. And then, of course, the stem cells are multiplied by orders of magnitude with hyperbaric and combining those two. So I wonder what the potential would be if we're trying to get more blood flow, oxygen into the cerebellum. I wonder in the future if there's some correlation between those two modalities and yours together, stacking those 3 to really drive all of that healing potential to that area of the brain.
Absolutely. We are at a very exciting time where there's so many exciting breakthroughs, many of which would be synergistic. I mean, it's going to take us years to work through this, and that's a shame, because we've got such a well-established medical profession that seems to take decades to change. And I see very exciting stuff, but relatively tiny amounts of investment going into it. So I would love to inspire academics who are at all interested in the cerebellum. I'd love to work with them. I'd like to get 100 research studies, and including combining with hyperbaric oxygen and other modalities, because there's definitely huge synergy.
Another modality that I've used on my brain is neurofeedback. I've done quite a bit of that. I did 40 years of Zen, which is what used to be kind of a branch of Bulletproof. It's a Dave Asprey program that he's developed, and now they've, changed it considerably. It's grown quite a bit since I did it. And then I work with Dr. Andrew Hill, who's a cognitive neuroscientist at UCLA, a professor, and he's got a place called Peak Brain Institute out in West LA. And I've been training with him for a couple of years, and we did a QEEG on my brain 1 year ago, which incidentally is at a time when I was living under those cell towers.
Wow. Yeah.
And then I did neurofeedback, and I do all kinds of stuff, that hopefully helps my brain. And then a few weeks ago, we did another scan, and I had 3 standard deviations of improvement overall in my brain function, measuring brain waves, brainwave activity, which is, even he was like, I don't know what you're doing. Some of this is neurofeedback, but whatever you're doing, which is probably has a lot to do with my brain was severely impaired from the radiation sickness that I was experiencing. But that was really exciting. So I'm wondering, have you made any correlations between your training and the cerebellum and neurofeedback? And does neurofeedback do anything for the cerebellum, or does that branch of science kind of ignore that part of the brain and just focus on, the brainwave activity?
What I know of neurofeedback is it has enormous impact everywhere, but I've not yet seen evidence of it having impact in the cerebellum. Now, I'm not the right expert to ask. I'm a fan of neurofeedback, and I'm working with a researcher right now who's got a lot of experience of neurofeedback. His view is that my approach to the cerebellum is the best approach he knows of. So he's putting all his time and resource in working with me to finding ways of starting from the bottom-up approach. Neurofeedback is a lot of all over and some top down. I'm working from the bottom up, so it's kind of real root cause stuff. So don't interpret that as any disrespect to neurofeedback. On the contrary, what has been impairing it has been the ability to research it in a thorough way, because everybody's brain is different. So creating double-blind studies where you've got control groups and so on is really hard when every brain is fundamentally wired very differently. So they've had a problem in coming up with research that proves absolutely that they're making huge change. So I think at the moment they're having to undersell themselves a little bit, but they're actually probably doing more good than the research is currently showing. That's my hunch.
Interesting. Yeah, I asked that because I've had a lot of conversations with Dr. Hill, who's a brilliant guy, and I don't think in any of my scans or any of the work we've done or the different trainings that I've done, I don't think I've ever heard the word cerebellum once.
Yeah, that's
so it must be just kind of, it's just not part of that modality. But because I saw quantifiable results, and I don't know that, obviously probably didn't do anything for my cerebellum, but I definitely am in much better shape brain health-wise than I was before, due to stacking all of the different practices and modalities. But it'd be interesting to see what happens in terms of the QEEG after undergoing 6 months of your cerebellum training, going in and getting scanned again and not doing much else. Maybe take a break from neurofeedback, focus on really repairing the cerebellum, getting the blood flow back in there, and then see what happens in terms of improvement on overall brain health based on the QEEG and brain wave.
Absolutely.
Analysis. Interesting stuff. I want to back up a little bit to some of the symptoms, because I think that's something a lot about. So especially in relation to kids and learning disabilities and things like that, because based on my own experience and even a couple close friends of mine that I think would probably be diagnosed with some level of dyslexia, maybe even ADD, adult guys in their 30s and 40s, whatever. And having suffered a lot in school because I felt really dumb. And as an adult, I just chalk it up to the type of intelligence that I was born with is different than the way that they train intelligence in a U.S. public school in the 70s and 80s, right? And so as an adult, I've had to realize, I'm actually sort of smart. I learn in a different way. And so, like, if you hand me an Excel spreadsheet, it looks like Chinese to me. If you hand me an infographic with shapes and colors, I get it immediately. So, I've been tested for ADD and ADHD, and I don't have it according to the the neurofeedback method of testing. But what's the difference between ADHD and dyslexia in kids? Are those often misdiagnosed? Are they the same thing? Is it just two names for kind of the same sort of issue with and how's it related to the cerebellum?
Well,
There's
so much confusion around this, and this confusion hurts and holds back so many kids. Why is it that a large proportion of hugely successful people, billionaires and so on, dropped out of the school system at some point?
I did.
So the education system as we know it does not measure the real underlying intelligence. If you've got any limitation in your ability to read or to write and get all your thoughts down, if you've got any impairment there, then you're not going to see the real intelligence of the child. So the irony is, Luke, that the brighter you are, the more chance there is that there's going to be some limitation in skill development. Like there's a glass ceiling. Glass ceiling grows over your eye tracking, so you never actually read very well. Or some glass ceiling holds back the development of your auditory processing, so what you hear doesn't effortlessly turn into thoughts you comprehend. So, for instance, children that are listening in a classroom, after 3 or 4 sentences, they're so far behind with processing, the teacher's carrying on without them, and they're looking out the window, or they're making a fuss or making their mates laugh in the classroom. So the brighter you are, the more impaired you are, so that leads to this huge misunderstanding. Now, I was taken in by this. When I started my research 20 years ago, I started thinking in terms of what is ADHD and what is the disease called dyslexia and so on. I was barking up the wrong tree, because after I'd met a few tens of thousands of these children and adults, I realized we were talking about, in the main, very bright people that were being regarded as very slow people, as if they'd got some permanent limitation to their brain. And I turned it around. My first book was Dyslexia, the Miracle Cure, which was the topic of a very famous broadcaster in Britain who did a program on me. And afterwards I realized that was wrong. We shouldn't be calling these children by any label. We should be saying, they've got huge potential. Our job is to find it. So I've kind of turned around completely in my whole thought process. So what's the difference between dyslexia and ADHD? Well, if you went to half a dozen experts in the US and half a dozen experts in the UK with the same child, you'd probably get about 10 different answers. You'd tend to get a bit more dyslexia diagnoses in the UK and a bit more ADHD diagnosis in the US. That's the kind of the way it is. But generally, ADHD is applied to those children that struggle with concentration, have a degree of hyperactivity, whereas dyslexia is more focused upon reading ability. But the fact is that all those issues manifest to some extent or other in all those children with both of those labels. So there's confusion even about the whole diagnosis process. You then asked very, very wisely, what's the link with the cerebellum? When the cerebellum is itself not stimulated, not developed, it's not creating plasticity, it's not wiring up skills, you will get underdevelopment of key skills. And dyslexia or reading difficulties is almost always poor eye tracking. So instead of their eyes going smoothly across the line, taking the information in, their eyes are jumping up and down and backwards and forwards, trying to focus on the words. As a result, that poor child has got to work so hard just to take in the information. They've got scrambled letters in their brain, they're working hard to unscramble them, and then they work out eventually, oh, that's the word. Then they move on and have to do the same with the next word and the next word. They get to the end of the sentence and they've forgotten what those first words are in the sentence. They've had to work so hard. So that's the problem with reading issues. With listening issues, with concentration issues, it's often the same thing, except that it's applying to turning sound waves into comprehended thoughts. If that skill isn't developed, it will take them several seconds to decipher what's been said in a sentence. By the time they've deciphered it, the teacher or whoever is speaking has gone on 2 sentences.
Right. They're left in the dust by that time.
Both of those skills are linked to the cerebellum. Likewise, often children with those issues often will be poor at sporting skills. Some are poor at all skills. That's lack of automaticity, lack of cerebellar development of the coordination between balance and gross movement. So all of these are skills, and that's what I love people to understand. Instead of looking at a child and assuming they're thick, or they're stupid, or they're lazy, or even worse, they've had bad parents, we're actually generally looking at children who've got huge potential a potential that can now be found.
And do you think, based on your research that all of these issues that kids have are in some way related to the dysfunction or the impairment of the cerebellum?
Absolutely.
So is it at a point, are all the diagnoses and the minutia of trying to figure out what it is almost irrelevant? Like, let's just go to the thing and fix it?
Let's go to exactly. Let's go to what's holding them back.
Right.
You know, if you look at the process of diagnoses, it's complicated and it's all symptom-based. If you look at the root cause and do some neurological tests, you can tell precisely where it is, and it always points to the cerebellum.
What about kids? And I know one kid that fits this description intimately, being myself. For example, when I was a kid, I really excelled in reading, writing, language. I think it's no accident that I ended up having conversations, and I'm able to learn foreign languages relatively easily and things like that. But I still can barely do basic math on paper. You know, I don't even think I know how to do division. I could do simple addition and subtraction, probably with the formula that I would have to go back and kind of remember, right? Obviously, who needs to know how to do it when you've got an iPhone next to you? But science and very linear ways of thinking and problem solving was and continues to be very challenging. Even coming over here to the UK, it drives me fucking crazy. Everything's in military time.
Yeah.
And then my friend Tim's like, oh, you just add 12 or subtract 12. I'm like, dude, I would have to stop in the street, someone, hey, meet me at this time, or the bus comes at this time, or whatever. I'd have to stop and really, okay, 12 plus blah, blah, blah. It's like, I just seem to lack the ability. So do you think, say, one kid has an aptitude for art and language and is maybe perhaps a bit more right brain centered or enabled versus a kid that, is the converse? Do you think that deficiencies in that area also have something to do with the cerebellum? In other words, are all kids able to up-level their skills by addressing the cerebellum, regardless of what their propensities are in skill level?
Different parts of the cerebellum are responsible for different types of skill. So when it comes to maths or music or art or speaking, that different parts of the cerebellum are responsible, and there's work taking place right now on identifying which specific part is responsible for which specific type of skill. So those that are natural at maths or natural at art or dancing or flying a helicopter or whatever particular complex skill it is, it's because the part or parts of the cerebellum responsible for putting together that skill, automatizing the process, is itself fully developed. So with maths, there are lots of concepts that need to become automatized so you get it. So if the part of the cerebellum that's responsible for helping you automatize those processes is itself not developed, then maths concepts won't go in. Now, what I want to be careful of is that you don't interpret that I can definitely always improve every part of the cerebellum and therefore I could transform your maths. I'm not going to promise that. If I'm very cautious about promising anything. All I know is that we make a huge difference to just about everybody that goes through our program.
Cool. Very interesting.
Now, maths is a foundational thing. So if you're going to be good at maths, you need to know the basics and then the next layer and the next layer and the next layer and the next layer. So you're not going to be able to start doing differential calculus day one, because it's very much a layered thing. It's not like learning a language. So if you have missed out on those foundation layers, you'll need someone to take the time to put those pieces back in after the cerebellum has itself been sorted out.
Yeah, and also I think in adulthood it's unlikely that someone would really want to go against the grain and try to gain aptitude in something that's not necessary or that they don't have a passion to learn about.
Yeah,
I think the potential for parents and teachers and the education system in general to be able to address some of these deficiencies that are cerebellum related versus just every kid being unique and having abilities and aptitude in different areas, right? Like there's always going to be a kid that's great at art and music and sucks at science and math, right? So you can't necessarily, change one's orientation, but if there are extreme learning disabilities and deficiencies early on, at least you're able to give them a fighting chance. And later in life, they may or may not have a passion in life or dreams and goals that need those attributes or skills in order to be successful.
Sure. And whilst you've got a smartphone, you're always going to have a solution to any maths problems you've got.
Right. What about the effect of acute drug and alcohol abuse on the cerebellum? Is there any evidence to support the idea that the cerebellum gets further impaired through addictions, etc.?
There is some evidence. It's not absolute yet, but what is very clear is when you take alcohol goes straight to the cerebellum.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
When someone loses and starts to slur their speech or starts to fall about, it's because the coordination of the cerebellum has been impaired. The alcohol has shorted out several key circuits and connections, and suddenly what you were really good at, like walking and talking, suddenly you're not so good at, or sometimes very poor at, and you start falling over. So alcohol does go straight to the cerebellum. There's been some interesting work on rats that's proved that point pretty conclusively.
Drunk rats?
Yeah.
Well, based on that, I think a lot of people walking around the city of London have impaired cerebellums anytime after dark. You think about 50% of the people are pissed drunk.
But Danielle Amen's doing some great work on showing the effect of long-term use of drugs on different parts of the brain. You can see physical changes there in parts of the brain. The studies he's doing on that are worth looking at.
Yeah, I've seen some of his scans, and it's terrifying. Brains look like Swiss cheese, especially with crystal meth, probably horribly cut MDMA, things like that over time can really trash your brain. So I was curious about that.
But the wonderful thing about the cerebellum is that you can reinstate it at any age in life.
Really?
The early theory is that our plasticity goes and fades out in teenage and so on. It's totally wrong. We've done work on people up to the age of 90. In fact, we made a lady of 82 read. She was a very touching case. She started to read for the first time in her life at 82. The age of 84, I heard from her again, and she was reading and writing in 3 languages.
What? You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
All right, I'm starting this training right now. Podcast is over. Get out the gear. And then what role do nutrients and dietary disciplines have in the health and function of the cerebellum? Is that relevant, and if so, how much?
It is absolutely relevant. It's a very complex area. I'm a big fan of dietary, appropriate diets and using nutrients appropriately. I don't tend to mix them in my research because I don't want to have confusing results. I want people to know what is making the difference. So absolutely believe in them, and if you've got a poor diet, get your diet sorted out. If you haven't, find out what nutrients you need, find out and get that right as well. And when we deal with severe cases of, say, ADHD or autism, it's a great place to start, because often if you've got a child or an adult, for that matter, that simply cannot comply with a program that's going to transform their cerebellum, sometimes you have to start with getting their diet right so they end up being able to comply and behave and perform appropriately, so they can then get stuck into a program like ours. So big fan. I'm not doing combined research, synergistic research at the moment. Going down the line, we will get there.
In terms of autism and some of these other serious afflictions, what miracle results have you seen? Obviously, nobody wants to give medical claims and things like that, but I know from just chatting to you, you've told me some stories about the 82-year-old woman and these kind of things. And I think that when it comes to kids, especially autism, is probably one of the hardest things we face. A good friend of mine has an autistic kid, and it's it's absolutely heartbreaking and so confusing. And I think it's one of those things that really rips families apart, and it's just such a seemingly hopeless situation. So
let me talk about my stepson, Ninka's eldest son. He was infantile autistic and a pretty severe case. Today, he's got a full-time job. They love him at his work. He creates amazing music. He's a DJ and a music producer, creating a music, and he's got an incredible sense of humor. Now, anybody that knows anything about the severity of infantile autism, just to describe that would sound like an absurd journey. Now, Ninka did a huge amount of work on his diet and dietary input and nutrition and got him to a very good place. I came along and helped him with all his skill development. So he's gone through 2 years of college, become a music producer. So I'm talking about an example that I've actually been able to watch what has happened. I could tell you at the older end of the spectrum, a family an elderly couple, they'd got a son in his late 40s, and he went through my program. It actually took him 3 years, but it changed his life. And they came to me at the end, and it was very touching. They said, "We're not afraid to get old and die now because he can look after himself." So that was the severity of the change. He up until the time he did my program, he would just follow them around silently, not talking. He couldn't dress himself or wash properly. After 3 years, he was at college learning how to be a chef in his late 40s. And that's the kind of change that's possible. So these are, I got thousands of tear-jerking stories because every one I deal with feels like the first for some reason, because it's so important and so life-changing.
Wow, that's cool. In terms of people that just want to up their performance more in the biohacking or even athletics, what do you think the missing links are when we're trying to use nootropics and meditation, mindfulness, neurofeedback, as we mentioned, and kind of missing the cerebellum piece? What does getting the cerebellum on board look like in terms of just someone who's healthy, happy, highly functioning, but wants to take it to the next level?
Well, one of the things that cerebellum impacts in is, to what extent do we get overloaded? We've got our prefrontal cortex is where our thinking brain is. It's the bit of the brain where we make decisions, we remember lists, and it's the bit of the brain that gets stressed when it gets overloaded. So when the brain is overloaded, it's often because parts of the cerebellum hasn't finished off the development of skills, and as a result, the thinking brain is having to make up for that. So if you think about when you're learning to ride a bike or learning to drive a car, you're thinking incredibly hard, and when you're thinking hard about anything, you're not doing it very well. If it's riding a bike, you're probably falling off, and so on. If it's riding a car, then you're hitting the curb, and you're doing all sorts of jumpy, lumpy things until it becomes a fully hardwired and developed skill, and that's what the cerebellum does. So if you've got any skill that has never reached its full potential, it's hit a glass ceiling, then your thinking brain, your working memory is going to be full of stuff that shouldn't be there. You're going to find it far more stressful to live in that state. You're going to find you're going to far more frequently lose emotional control, get frustrated, get angry, or whatever it is. So the role of the cerebellum in creating extra cognitive capacity that makes us feel more relaxed, less stressed, able to cognitively cope with far more, is so much. So I see it working synergistically with all of these other things. Obviously I'm biased, but I would start with the cerebellum. Let's get my brain being the best version it can possibly be, and then see where I need some help after that.
That makes perfect sense. So that would, to me, indicate that issues like decision fatigue and the energy expenditure of switching tasks.
Exactly.
These are things that I'm becoming aware of as I work on my productivity and focus. For example, of I've developed systems where when I'm doing my podcast, I batch every single task out. Wow. So I'll do 6 of the same things in a row, then switch tasks and do the next step of whatever process it might be. But it takes a bit of discipline and kind of building my own internal SOP, for lack of a better term, so that my operations and systems are in place to lessen the fatigue so I can be more effective at each of those tasks. But I'm imagining that if our cerebellum is on board and kicking ass, that we would have less decision fatigue and a greater ability to switch tasks and, kind of, for lack of a better term, freeing up RAM, space in our brain to be able to operate within that. Does that make
It makes
sense to you?
total sense. It's a great way of expressing it. I'll use that if I might. Thank you.
You can take it. Not copywritten yet.
The thinking brain is where we make decisions, and the more thinking brain capacity that's used up with incompletely developed key skills, the less decision-making space you've got. So you end up making poorer decisions. You end up making short-term decisions because you simply don't have the capacity to take into account the longer-term things, the health-related things. So you make worse decisions with limited thinking brain space.
Oh, you got that right.
But you also are less organized. you're more forgetful. The thinking brain is where it's the bit that links long-term memory to short-term memory. It's where we keep lists and where we organize things. If that is full of stuff that shouldn't be there, I'm going to be very hampered in my ability to be organized.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, I was going to ask next about memory, short-term, long-term memory, which is something I've struggled a lot with, and a lot of people I know do. Forgetfulness, walking out of a room and going, wait, what was I doing?
Exactly.
It's like early onset dementia. I'm like 48, and sometimes I'm just like, what am I doing? I walk into a room and I have no idea why I went in there. And of course it depends on a number of things like sleep and
a classic example
and whatnot. But how does this help memory?
Well, let me just give you one classic example.
Sure.
Any mum listening will relate to this. You've got a child that's struggling with some aspect of learning. Often, if you send them upstairs to fetch 3 things, they'll get to the top of the stairs and say, "What did you send me for?" Because that, if their cerebellum isn't fully developed, it probably means their balance and coordination isn't fully automatized. Just the act of walking upstairs will put stress on the thinking brain and force out all the things that she'd put there, the list that she'd just given him to go and get from upstairs. So that's a classic example. So the impact of the cerebellum is to free up working memory space by taking stuff out of there that shouldn't be being processed there. It should be being processed up in the cortex, where there's virtually unlimited capacity and certainly infinitely greater speed. So any undeveloped skills fills up this critical thinking brain space, which hampers working memory. It means we've got nowhere to store stuff that we want to retain. Generally we retain stuff into long-term memory when we're asleep, but what you learn in the day you tend to park in your working memory, and then at night when you're asleep it puts it up into long-term memory. If your thinking brain is full, your working memory is full, you've got nowhere to store it. So your retention is a lot less. And the same in reverse. If your thinking brain is full, you've got nowhere to recover thoughts from long-term memory. So you might well be in a stressful situation, you can't remember something. Then later on in the day, when things are calmer, it comes back to you because your working memory is clearer at that point.
What role does the cerebellum have in subconscious versus conscious mind?
That's a very deep question. I don't think I'm qualified to answer it fully, but here's my thoughts. The subconscious mind is incredibly important, and I'm working now on understanding the role of the amygdala on, especially following trauma, and the impact that has on creating all sorts of PTSD type symptoms and putting us into fight or flight and so on. The cerebellum and its effect on the working memory capacity doesn't have a direct impact on the subconscious. But what it does do, because it frees up working memory capacity, it means that we less often revert to or lose control of our emotions, and therefore we're less likely to be triggering things in the amygdala. So it doesn't have a direct consequence on the subconscious, but it does have some indirect benefits. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's very interesting, and that leads me to my exact next question, which again, like many of my questions, are personally motivated. Something that I've come to realize really through doing this podcast and interviewing so many brilliant people in all realms of human development and performance like yourself is really the meaningful role that not just early childhood trauma, but especially that, but even any point of trauma during one's life really shapes who you become.
Sure.
And the capacity for handling stress and the capacity for intimacy and vulnerability and that fight or flight response. And so the deeper down the rabbit hole I go with that, the more I find how meaningful that really is. Sure. And you mentioned the amygdala, now getting my basic Flintstonian understanding of how the amygdala gets damaged by trauma, and then you have a flood of adrenaline and cortisol, which we kind of call in common parlance being triggered, or you're activated, or whatever the case may be, where you're now having as an adult a completely abnormal and exaggerated internal and sometimes externally expressed emotional experience, right? Where someone slams the door and you jump out of your skin, or someone, is a little joking with you and a little sarcastic and you take it very personally, and all of these issues that we have that I think are not only painful subjectively for the person having that overreaction or that experience, but also such a hindrance to our intimate relationships, right? Because we get hijacked by the amygdala and that stress response that we experience. And I think as someone who, I was in therapy by the time I was, 14 years old. And I mean, I've done so much work, and in my recent years thought, okay, I've kind of dealt with the childhood stuff and I'm good now. I don't need to keep regurgitating that stuff and telling the stories and reliving it. Let's just move on. And the fact is, I find it very difficult to move on because I'm continuing to see how those things resurface in a completely unrelated situation. And I'm part of, like, when I took ayahuasca the first 4 times, it was like I was really shown how profoundly impacted I was as a kid through neglect, abandonment, trauma, and how those things still very much drive many aspects of my personality and are the things that really hold me back from having a full, joyful experience of life. And so I'm just like, Jesus, how long do I have to work on it? It's like, does it ever end? Like, can I ever move on from that? And I know so many people listening, because I've done shows specifically on trauma and all of this with Maston Kipp. I did a great one for a couple hours. He's one of the most prominent kind of trauma informed teachers, leaders, and my listeners really resonated with that one, and we're all kind of realizing, like, wow, especially if we had a rough childhood, that we're kind of doomed. And it's like, the first 7 years of your life you get wrecked, and you spend the next 80 trying to fix what happened to you. So that's kind of a long way of expressing and asking the question: how does the cerebellum and bringing that back online through this training that you've developed, how does that help us with our reactivity and our emotional balance and our ability to connect and to be vulnerable and intimate and to receive and express love and have a really connected, trauma-free experience of life?
Another very deep and complex subject. Let's just touch on the creation of a child that's affected by trauma and what's happening in those traumas. The children that have those very negative early childhood experiences, they're creating an automatic alarm system, a very powerful alarm system that mainly goes off with false alarms, virtually always false alarms throughout their life.
I got a parking ticket. I want to kill someone.
But when you go through your early childhood and you don't feel safe, if a parent is not available or abusing you or whatever is happening, so that you just don't feel safe, that alarm system becomes very powerful and very sophisticated, and you can't control it. So if it shows itself up as some form of PTSD or fight or flight mechanisms in later life, it's really cruel to say to those people, pull yourself together, because they haven't got a choice. They're not choosing to behave like that. They're not choosing to go into fight or flight. And their brain gets filled with cortisol, and it takes hours to recover. So it's really important that people fully understand what's happening in those that have those issues. So my heart really goes out to folk that have had severe trauma in childhood, because it does take some undoing. And you've had you've been able to go through ayahuasca and so on. I am determined that I'm going to work with some academics in the coming years to come up with affordable ways, low-cost ways of getting people help to overcome those. Things like EMDR, they are effective. And I'm researching now, because I think there's ways of making EMDR many times more effective than it currently is. And that could be very, very affordable and relatable to people. But what does the cerebellum do? Cerebellum increases your cognitive, your conscious capacity, which does give you more strength to combat, to avoid going into the subconscious amygdala-related state. But it doesn't solve it. So cerebellum is very powerful, but it doesn't solve the fundamental issue. The amygdala has wired that up, and you've got to work in the subconscious. So there's no point in doing conscious interventions to deal with the subconscious. It just doesn't work. But what we do is give you more cognitive strength, more cognitive capacity, a greater sense of confidence, Because the more automaticity you have in all your fundamental skills, you have more confidence. So I see confidence as being neurological. So that does give you an extra strength. But it would be wrong for me to suggest that we actually are curing in any sense the underlying condition.
Oh, that makes total sense. And I appreciate your modesty and honesty with that, because you're talking about two different areas of the brain.
Completely, yeah.
I've noticed, through mindfulness, meditation practices, Kundalini yoga, etc. I would say primarily Vedic meditation and all kinds of other meditation for years and years that I did before that. I'm like 22 years into various practices of meditation because I've needed a lot of it. But I've improved a lot in terms of reactivity and being triggered because of that gap of awareness, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
living more from a witness and observer state where the instinctive impulse or the amygdala firing from past trauma happens perhaps, but because there's a little gap of separation there, there's a time delay on being caught in it, as you describe. Once one has been so afflicted, you can get trapped there for hours, and every once in a while that does happen to me, and I know I'm trapped. I know I'm observing, like, wow, okay, right now I'm having an adrenaline and a cortisol overdose, and I know that's what is happening, but it doesn't make it hurt any less, and it doesn't make it stop. It's like sometimes you just have to kind of ride it out and go, okay, well, here we go. I'm fucked up. I'm going to have to just wait this one out. And, the more you resist and the more you try to fix it, the tighter it grabs you. But I have made a lot of progress with emotional well-being and the ability to not be so reactive just through, years and years and years of meditation. But it's been a really slow road, just a little bit of progress at a time. Now, I've come light years from where I started, but I'm still looking for the thing, like, who's going to fix the goddamn amygdala? How do you fix it so it doesn't do that anymore? But I really appreciate your point of view that if we have more overall capacity, even though, the training that you've developed doesn't particularly address that part of the brain and that response yet. Okay, great. Is that, listen, if we have more RAM, more space available energetically, and we have more control over just our basic fundamental function neurologically, that's going to give us perhaps more of that gap.
More buffer.
Right, more buffer that some of us develop through spiritual practices and, I'm sure different forms of therapy and all that kind of stuff. So
there is an extra thing it does.
Okay.
Because the more RAM you have, it's the area of RAM or the executive function, which is all same sort of areas, the working memory and so on, that is where your impulsivity control happens or not. So the more capacity you've got there, the less that's going on, the less likely you are to trigger some impulsive response, which can often be the trigger for an amygdala reaction. So, we observe dramatic reduction in impulsivity in those that do and have done our program, because that increase in cognitive space in RAM seems to dramatically increase their ability to avoid being impulsive. It also, and we need to do a lot more research on this, but we're getting a lot of evidence of it improving OCD, which is the same thing. So you end up with far greater control and much greater calmness. So that's a better platform on which to cope with underlying amygdala-related issues.
So you're seeing good results with anxiety and obsessive-compulsive behavior.
Absolutely.
And I'm assuming then sort of the converse of anxiety, depression, of being kind of understimulated versus overstimulated.
Absolutely. But there is some good news we haven't touched on yet.
Oh, good. I mean, there's a lot of good news so far. This is exciting stuff.
No, but there's
Sounds
good
like some
news.
great research.
Have you not noticed that those that have substantial trauma in childhood often end up with a degree of genius that's remarkable? It's almost as if the pressure of childhood, that pressure cooker of fear and pain they go through, ends up with them looking for solutions where others don't look. So they're kind of hardwired to look for connections, look for solutions, look for links. And to me, it often shows itself in a degree of genius that's quite remarkable. There's often all sorts of other PTSD things which are real downsides, but let's focus on the fact that genius often exists in those that have gone through huge pain and trauma.
I would say absolutely so. And also the fact that those of us that have gone through a considerable amount of pain and discomfort and suffering in our lives are also if you make it through it, are typically driven toward evolving and raising their consciousness by any means necessary, because you see that you need to become tethered and connected to something greater than yourself in order not only to survive at first, but then later to thrive as it becomes a way of life, and as you become more fulfilled through spiritual pursuit, etc., expanding and raising your consciousness.
Now, you are a fan and see huge benefit of meditation. One of the things that happens when you develop the cerebellum is that by freeing up working memory space, you're getting yourself much closer to a meditative state. So meditation and maintaining depth in meditation becomes easier.
Nice. One thing you've talked about is how brain development can make you a better lover. And actually, we got to touch on sex, and then, as we come to a close, people are probably going, okay, we get it. This sounds awesome. What is it? How does it work? So I want to really make sure and cover that. But because I love sex, and that not just the sex, but the connection with another person that you love at this stage in life, although it wasn't always that deep. How can this teach us to, read our partner's energy and body language and, relate to someone intimately in a more meaningful way?
Well, if you've got more cognitive capacity, you've got more awareness. But it's far deeper than that. The connection between, we're two guys, so we can talk about the limitations that guys have, perhaps more easily than limitations that girls have. But as guys, very often, when we do things like touch, we find it hard to touch in a gentle, very sensitive way. Now, the more developed your cerebellum is, the more sensory inputs you're going to be getting through your fingertips. So when you touch, it multiplies, it amplifies the feelings you get. And women love that. They absolutely love that. So they're very practical sensory integration things that developing the cerebellum makes a huge difference to. So the ability to empathize is a function of how much capacity you've got, how much are you reading. So, those who've got significant interpersonal skill, it's often the symptoms of, say, Asperger's, where folk find it really difficult to read someone else. They are skills. We're probably all on the spectrum somewhere. So if we can take ourselves further along the more highly developed part of the spectrum, we are going to become much more sensitive. But there's one more area that I've got to touch on. Many guys struggle with maintaining rhythm when they're having sex. Lack of automaticity in the very process of maintaining rhythm. It's not automatic to them.
What do you mean by rhythm?
Well, when you're actually physically having sex, if you want to maintain a good rhythm during the sex act, and that's really important, especially for the female. She wants to make sure she's thoroughly stimulated for a good period of time. If there's lack of automaticity in the coordination of your movements, you're going to be in mental overload trying to maintain that rhythm because it isn't natural and automatic.
Oh, that's interesting.
And whenever you're going to come far too quickly. So whenever you're having to think very deeply about what you are doing, you're going to go into overload and you're going to come far too soon. So the more automaticity you can have in coordination, in touch, creating working memory space that gives you more capacity to empathize, you're going to be one heck of a better lover.
Wow, damn. And here goes every woman listening to this going, how do I order this for my man?
Well, we have a lovely situation. When I mention that to guys, and I don't mention it that often, but when I do, they always want the program for some other reason. They don't mention I want to be a better lover. Yeah. Of course, their wives do. They want them to be a better lover, but the guys want it for concentration, or they want to play soccer better, or whatever sport, golf, whatever it is. They want a better lower handicap. And of course, the better the automaticity you have, the more consistent your sport is going to be as well. So whatever your reason, call it whatever reason you like, but most men deep down, they want to be better lovers.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's one of the most rich experiences you can have in life. And the better you are at it, the more of a rich experience it's going to be.
And the more automatic you are in all of your physical and sensual movements and experiences, the more you can stay conscious, the more mental capacity you have to be present with your partner.
Right.
And that is so thrilling. And so I see the possibility of far greater intimacy being experienced, the more mental capacity you have. And the cerebellum, believe it or not, is directly related to that.
Fantastic. And I've also heard you talk about how porn hardwires poor skills in bed out. And I'm absolutely a proponent of living a porn-free life at this point. But I don't know exactly how it relates to that. How does porn ruin your sex life or make you a poor lover as related to brain function?
Well, our sensory integration, which is what the cerebellum does, is responding to whatever regular stimuli I've got. When you're watching porn, you're not touching anyone. You've got no somatosensory feelings. You might be hearing some sound, you might be seeing something visual, but you've got no touch going on, you've got no taste. So only some of your senses are being stimulated. So if you're being stimulated by something the other side of a screen, and only some of your senses, you'll end up reacting to just those senses. So when you're with a real partner, suddenly all of your senses are going to be alive and stimulated, and you're not going to be able to last more than a few seconds. So your performance, you're going to be so overloaded with sensory stimulation because your brain isn't used to it. You've hardwired your brain. And it's particularly serious for teenagers and so on when they're getting used to having sexual feelings and so on. If they hardwire their feelings using porn, they're going to be terrible lovers.
It makes sense. It is the part of your analysis there to me is a bit counterintuitive, and I think antithetical to my own life experience in some ways. It's what I found when I was earlier in life, which wasn't that long ago, and was very active with pornography. I mean, it's not like sitting around all day, but it's kind of a thing you do. I think a lot of men, just especially with the availability of it in the internet age. I found that with regular use of pornography, I think because of the unnatural overstimulation and the endless variety of visual stimulation, and God knows what's happening in the brain on a chemical level of just dopamine surges. And as John Gray explained to me once, even just the act of having sex with yourself without another person, but specifically with the artificial stimulation, is that you're having this complete abnormal and unnatural cascade of hormones and neurotransmitters. So you have this huge burst of dopamine and testosterone, but then you don't have the norepinephrine to balance it, and also the oxytocin that would be present in an actual real physical interaction with another person. So there's a lot to that, but I actually found that in relationships, it was much earlier in life when I think porn was a more regular thing. It's faded out gradually over the past 20 years or so to now dwindling down to nothing, thankfully. But in longer-term committed relationships, I found that and I hope none of my former girlfriends are listening, hey, no, it's fine if they were. It wasn't your fault that I became less interested and actually had a harder time engaging and being excited and climaxing and things like that. And it would happen relatively quickly, and thus had a real aversion to monogamous relationships because
there wasn't enough stimuli.
Yeah, my brain was hardwired to like being hyper-stimulated. So when I was 16 years old, just seeing a girl naked and touching her boobies was like, my head was going to explode. And then moving into my 20s and 30s, and with the proliferation of pornography, it's like real sex with just one person tended to get kind of boring relatively fast, regardless of how much chemistry we had and how physically attractive they might have been. So
well, but just because all of the stimuli is coming from the visual and a bit from the auditory, so you're programmed for that completely. So it's really confusing to the brain to have all these other stimuli happening, and you tend to, unless you've got some new experience happening, your brain is completely confused. So I think it depends on what age you get into porn, but I'm certainly very frightened right now about young children getting access to porn before they have any sexual experience at all, because that's wiring them up in a really, really confused way. I'm a big fan of monogamy because, to me, the sensory stimulation of real love and of intimacy growing becomes the most powerful and wonderful thing. And so what's happening visually actually becomes less important. It's part of it, but the actual feeling of love and the response of love and that huge connection that can be developed, that to me is the most powerful and most important sensory input.
I agree 100%. It's taken me a long time to arrive at that realization, but absolutely 100%. Okay, so as we begin to come to a close, obviously, drum roll please, like let's get into how the training actually works. So what's it called? What do you do? How long do you do it for? Do you need a coach? Is it something, these are a lot of questions, and I just want you to dive in and kind of just give us the whole overview. And then, if it's a 6-month training, 10 minutes a day for a couple times, as I kind of understand it, then at 6 months, do you just stop, or can you grow in your cerebellum health and capacity if you did this indefinitely? Is it something that one could keep doing, or does it have kind of a diminishing returns at some point? So just kind of unpack the whole training, and then in summary of that, how does it become available to some of the listeners, of course?
Every brain is different, so one size fits all just doesn't work. So what we've done is created an artificial intelligent program that assesses you and delivers the right exercises that you do, and it's typically twice a day for 10 minutes. And the typical time for someone with an average condition would be 6 months. Twice a day, 6 months. We give full coaching every month along the way there, so that you understand the assessments, you understand the progress, and we answer any queries. So it's a fully coached, fully individualized program. But there are some that need to go on longer than 6 months. If you've got a profound condition, that's say on the spectrum, deeply on the spectrum, then often that can take a year or sometimes 2 years. So typically 6 months is enough. Once you've kick-started your cerebellum, you're creating wiring, you're creating skills that you are using and practicing all the time, and they tend to even get better. So that's the overall picture. If you're an elite athlete, we find most of the elite athletes, and they get amazing results, they actually want to carry on doing it because they're scared to stop. They want every last percent that they can possibly have. Automaticity, consistency, emotional control, lack of mental tiredness. They want all of those things all the time in every game because they're so competitive. And so can you carry on? Yeah, we do recommend folk carry on. They don't have to do it so often. Just do it 3 or 4 times a week to keep you at peak performance. Most athletes that do it, they want to do it every day whilst they're in there playing, whilst they're professional.
And what does the actual practice look like? Are you looking at an app, a computer screen? Are you listening to stuff? What does the training look like?
The assessments you have to do on a tablet or a PC because you need a big screen.
Okay.
And we want precision, so we know exactly which stimulation to give you and which activities to prescribe. You can actually do them on your smartphone. It's really easy to do on your smartphone. We give you avatars, so you know exactly what you've got to do. They're not cardio, they're not particularly hard work. They are mentally stressing, because it's only mental stress to the cerebellum actually forces the brain to develop the new skills that you need. So we're creating plasticity, we're giving the stimulation that tells the brain where to develop the new neural pathways, and that process happens automatically. And every day we're reviewing it and we're adjusting the sensory stimulation, adjusting the areas we're working on. So it's a process that takes several months. It's not as quick as a tablet. So if you're wanting an instant solution, it's not that. But if you want to invest in the rest of your life, finding the deep potential in your brain, I think it's a very sensible commitment.
Yeah, 10 minutes a couple times a day. It's funny, even my first thought is like, I don't have time for that. But then I look at I have like a usage report on Instagram, it tells you how long you've been. And it's like, I hit the 20-minute mark every day. I'm just like, turn that off. I got a couple more hours to zone out on Instagram. It's really annoying. So that's, I think that's totally doable for most people. What I find with this stuff, because people ask a lot about all the different practices, and compliance is very difficult for people to become committed and have the discipline to partake in something, even if it is 10 minutes twice a day. But I think if those of you listening are honest with yourself, there's things that you can sacrifice that are probably less productive and less meaningful, which probably have to do with something else on your phone. So if you're going to be sitting there and zoning out on your phone, we might as well do this. So I guess that's it, man. I think that's a really good overview, and thank you so much for your time and making it over here while I was in the UK. Because as we discussed, through email, it's like, oh, it sounds like a great opportunity. It's something I really want to learn from you. But geez, man, I just hate doing the interviews on Skype and Zoom and all that. So it was very fortuitous that we got to meet. In closing, real quick, I'd like to ask you who 3 teachers or teachings have been for you that have influenced your life that you might be able to direct our listeners to go check out.
Well, I have my own brand of spirituality. I was actually brought up in a cult. I spent the first 30 years of my life.
Oh shit, we got to do another episode.
No,
we didn't even get into that.
So my brand of spirituality is kind of different. So I have a kind of very practical brand. My belief is deep. I'm influenced by people who'd give me an awful lot of science. So, for instance, the work of John Gray. Every time I read one of his books, I just go almost orgasmic with the excitement of so much information he gives me. So he's to me he's a hero.
Oh man, Wynford. Not to blow my toot my own horn here, but I did an interview with him a couple days ago. He to be my 3rd time, but our first one in person, and we did about 2.5 hours. And we went through his entire journey of being the Maharishi's assistant.
Wait to hear that.
So all his whole spiritual path and all of the practices of meditation and all of these things that he's developed. We didn't even talk about relationships at all until the very end, and he started talking about really kind of sexual performance a bit. But it was the most fascinating conversation. We had the best time, and so we're kind of becoming buddies. And he's been a huge influence on me in terms of just learning how to relate to the opposite sex in general, in relationship or even in platonic relationships, just understanding the fundamental differences. So I'm really excited to share that episode with you since you're a fan. It's stuff I've never heard him talk about. And I intentionally kind of dug out some of his stuff, and he's like, this is kind of boring. You really want to talk about us? Like, no, keep going, man. This is very cool, because that's not what people typically ask of him. They want to learn how to stay married happily or whatever. So anyway, John Gray, fully on board. He'd probably be one of my top 3 too. Who else you got?
Well, I'm because I'm so practical, I actually like the balanced focus of people like Anthony Robbins. I can't listen to him for very long. I think an awful lot of what he does, but to me, he kind of puts it in everybody's lap. So I've got respect for the fact that he brings to huge numbers of people that wouldn't otherwise access a degree of spirituality and a degree of self-belief. So I've got huge regard for what he does. And there's a 3rd person you may not know of, and his name is Brian Main. And he's based here in the UK, and he's got an amazing way of getting people to set goals that take them on a totally different journey, of getting us out of the rut. And he's taught me an awful lot about spirituality, and if ever you get a chance to meet him, he's one amazing guy. So there's the 3. They're totally different, very diverse, but they've probably between them had more influence on me than anyone else.
Cool. Awesome, man. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Tony Robbins. I've done a bunch of his events, and it's been very transformative. I have a lot of respect for him. And so we can find Zing Performance at zingperformance.com/AF/LukeST. So you've given me that link. We'll, of course, put it in the show notes and all that stuff, and I'm sure I'll announce it in the intro and the outro and things like that. Are there any other links or social media or anything you want to point people to, or is that website a good place to go?
Website's a good place to go if folk want to watch me on I do a lot of very practical things on Instagram and on Facebook. If they look at my public figure page from Facebook, they'll find I do lots of stuff on different topics. And I answer everyone's questions every week.
Great. And what's your Instagram handle?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll figure it out.
We'll put it in the notes.
I'll figure it out. And I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, we'll do that for you. Okay, Wynford Dore, Dore. It probably has something to do with that. All right. Well, thank you so much, man, for joining me today.
Thank you, Luke, very much for what you're doing.
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.